Today is October 21st, 2017. These are the stories that matter. Headline: Trump tax cut plan gains momentum after U.S. budget vote. President Donald Trump's tax reform plans won partial support on Friday when Republican U.S. Senator Rand Paul said he was, quote, all in, end quote, for massive tax cuts. But the party was still far from united over how to achieve the main item on its domestic agenda. Trump's drive to overhaul the U.S. tax code cleared a critical hurdle on Thursday when the Senate approved a budget measure that will allow Republicans to pursue a tax cut package without Democratic Party support. But Republicans, who control both the Senate and the House of Representatives, have yet to produce a tax reform bill as a self-imposed deadline to overhaul the U.S. tax code by the end of the year approaches. The party's lawmakers differ widely on what cuts to make and how to pay for them. They are under intense pressure to succeed on tax reform after failing so far to make good on their other main legislative ambition, scrapping Obamacare. On major world markets, stock prices advanced on Friday, bond yields rose, and the U.S. dollar strengthened on increased hopes that Trump could make progress on his fiscal plans. Democrats are likely to reject the Trump administration's tax plan, which promises to deliver up to $6 trillion in tax cuts to businesses and people, but will bloat the federal deficit by $1.5 trillion over the next decade, according to Democrats. Senator Rand Paul, a fiscal hawk, was the lone Republican to vote against the budget measure on Thursday. He objected to spending levels that he said would exceed agreed caps by $43 billion and called for spending reforms for entitlements such as Medicare and Medicaid health insurance programs. On Friday, Paul said in a post on Twitter that he was, quote, all in for the biggest, boldest cuts possible and soon, end quote. But he did not address specifics of the tax plan. Trump on Friday expressed optimism about the tax reform, saying Paul would eventually back the proposed tax measure when it comes up for a vote. Overhauling the complex U.S. tax code has defied Washington since 1986. In the current effort, some Republican senators questioned the planned repeal of a 40% inheritance tax levied on estates worth more than $5.5 million, or $11 million for married couples, a tax paid only by the wealthiest American taxpayers. Republican lawmakers from high-tax states such as New York and California are also seeking compromise on repealing the deduction from federal taxes for state and local tax payments. The party's lawmakers agree roughly on lowering the corporate income tax rate from 35%, but still have not settled on a final number. Trump seeks to cut the corporate tax rate to 20%, which he says would create jobs and boost wages for blue-collar workers. U.S. House to vote on non-nuclear Iran sanctions next week. The U.S. House of Representatives will vote next week on new sanctions on Iran's ballistic missile program and on Lebanon's Iran-backed Hezbollah militia, senior House Republicans said on Friday, seeking to take a tough line against Iran without immediately moving to undermine the international nuclear deal. Quote, it is Congress's responsibility to work with the executive branch on a clear-eyed strategy to stop Iran's reckless behavior, end quote, Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, the number 2 House Republican, and Representative Ed Royce, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, said in a joint statement emailed to Reuters. Quote, immediate action towards this goal will come from the House next week as we vote on legislation that furthers sanctions on Hezbollah and Iran's missile proliferation, they said. President Trump defied both allies and adversaries on October 13th by refusing to certify that Iran is complying with an international agreement on its nuclear program, and threatened that he might ultimately terminate the accord. That threw the fate of the agreement between Iran, the United States, and other world powers into the hands of Congress by opening a 60-day window in which Congress could reimpose or, quote, snap back, quote, end quote, sanctions on Iran's nuclear program that were lifted under the agreement. In the Senate, a separate effort is underway to amend existing U.S. law to set new conditions for the U.S. role in the pact, although critics said such a plan could violate terms of the deal, formerly known as the JCPOA. Britain, France, and Germany, European U.S. allies who signed the agreement, are particularly concerned about Trump's action and have lobbied Congress to preserve the nuclear pact. The Senate has already unanimously passed a different version of the Hezbollah sanctions bill. Headline: Trump's Obamacare shift complicates ability to work with Democrats. President Donald Trump's disavowal this week of a bipartisan agreement to stabilize Obamacare has further eroded the already minimal trust congressional Democrats had in him, complicating prospects for gaining their cooperation on a range of issues. Trump's fellow Republicans who control Congress will need at least some Democratic support to pass critical legislation in the coming months to avert a government shutdown and prevent an unprecedented U.S. debt default. Quote, "I've been here with every president since Jerry Ford," end quote, said Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy, who was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1974 and is its longest-serving member. Quote, "I've always been willing to negotiate with anybody because they always keep the word. If you have a president who doesn't keep his word, it makes it more difficult," quote, end quote, Leahy said when asked about Trump's interactions with Congress. Trump initially backed the bipartisan deal announced on Tuesday by Democratic Senator Patty Murray and Republican Senator Lamar Alexander for shoring up insurance marketplaces established under Obamacare for 2 years by reviving federal subsidies to private insurers that Trump has scrapped. A day later, Trump disowned it. Trump enraged Republicans in September with his collaboration with top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer and top House of Representatives Democrat Nancy Pelosi. Trump cut a short-term spending deal with them, blindsiding Republican leaders, and then discussed with them the outlines of a plan to revive protections for young adult immigrants dubbed, quote, "dreamers," end quote, brought into the United States illegally as children. On both health care and Dreamers, Trump has shown that while he relishes deal-making, he is quick to row back in the face of conservative backlash. The president also has sent signals over the past few weeks that he is wavering on working with Democrats to help the Dreamers, making demands that could be a deal-breaker. December 8th deadline is looming for passing this spending measure needed to prevent a shutdown. Democrats could demand a steep price for their support, potentially an Obamacare fix, and action to help the Dreamers. Under a budget resolution passed by the Senate on Thursday night, Republicans need only a simple majority to pass Trump's proposed major tax cuts, though he has urged Democrats to support the overhaul. Short on staff, nursing crisis strains U.S. hospitals. A shortage of nurses at U.S. hospitals hit West Virginia's Charleston Area Medical Center at the worst possible time. The nonprofit healthcare system is one of the state's largest employers and sits in the heart of economically depressed coal country. It faces a $40 million deficit this year as it struggles with fewer privately insured patients, cuts in government reimbursement, and higher labor costs to attract a shrinking pool of nurses. To keep its operations intact, Charleston Medical is spending this year $12 million on visiting or, quote, travel nurses, end quote, twice as much as 3 years ago. It had no need for travel nurses a decade ago. Quote, "I've been a nurse for 40 years, and the shortage is the worst I've ever seen it," end quote, said Ron Moore, who retired in October from his position as Vice President and Chief Nursing Officer for the center. Charleston Area Medical's incentives include tuition reimbursement for nursing students who commit to work at the hospital for 2 years. Quote, "It's better to pay a traveler than to shut a bed," end quote, he said. Hospitals nationwide face tough choices when it comes to filling nursing jobs. They are paying billions of dollars collectively to recruit and retain nurses rather than risk patient safety or closing down departments, according to Reuters interviews with more than 20 hospitals, including some of the largest U.S. chains. In addition to higher salaries, retention, and signing bonuses, they now offer perks such as student loan repayment, free housing, and career mentoring, and rely more on foreign or temporary nurses to fill the gaps. The cost nationwide for travel nurses alone nearly doubled over the 3 years to $4.8 billion in 2017, according to Staffing Industry Analysts, a global advisor on workforce issues. Nursing shortages have occurred in the past, but the current crisis is far worse. The Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates that there will be more than 1 million registered nurse openings by 2024, twice the rate seen in previous shortages. A major driver is the aging of the baby boomer generation, with a greater number of patients seeking care, including many more complex cases, and a new wave of retirements among trained nurses. Industry experts, from hospital associations to Wall Street analysts, say the crisis is harder to address than in the past. A faculty shortage and too few nursing school slots has contributed to the problem. Healthcare experts warn that the shortfall presents risks to patients and providers. Research published in August in the International Journal of Nursing Studies found that having inadequate number of registered nurses on staff made it more likely that a patient would die after common surgeries. UAB Hospital in Birmingham, Alabama, has invested millions to attract nurses, but still has 300 jobs to fill. At times, nursing vacancy rates in some of its departments has hit 20% or higher. Quote, "We've rarely canceled a surgery or closed a bed because of a lack of staffing," end quote, said Terry Poe, chief of nursing at the hospital, the state's largest, which serves many low-income and uninsured residents. Last year, the medical center covered nearly $200 million in unreimbursed medical costs for patients. It spent $4.5 million for visiting nurses during fiscal 2016, including $3 million for post-surgery services, compared with $858,000 in 2012. Smaller hospitals find it much harder to compete in this climate. More than 40% of rural hospitals had negative operating margins in 2015, according to the Chartis Center for Rural Health. In rural Missouri, 25-bed St. Genevieve County Memorial Hospital had to offer signing bonuses, tuition reimbursement, and pay differentials when staffing is critically low in units such as obstetrics. They haven't closed beds, but they have hired less experienced nurses, raised salaries, and turned away at least one patient who would have been in its long-term care program. Quote, "We've had to try whatever it takes to get nurses here," end quote, said Rita Broomfield, head of nursing at the hospital. Quote, "It's a struggle every day to get qualified staff." Trump expected to pressure China's Xi to rein in North Korea. U.S. President Donald Trump is expected to pressure China's president when they meet next month in Beijing to do more to rein in North Korea. Trump leaves November 3rd on a trip that will take him to Japan, South Korea, China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. It will be his first tour of Asia since taking power in January, and one with a major priority: preventing the standoff with North Korea from spiraling out of control. Xi is immersed in a Communist Party Congress expected to culminate in him consolidating his control and potentially retaining power beyond 2022, when the next Congress takes place. Trump believes that Xi should have even more leverage to work on the North Korea problem. Quote, "The president's view is you have even less of an excuse now. He's not going to step lightly," end quote, said one official. Trump wants to gain serious cooperation from China to persuade Pyongyang to either change its mind or to help deprive it of enough resources that it has no choice but to alter its behavior, the official said. Trump has heaped praise on Xi in recent weeks in hopes of gaining Chinese cooperation and has held back from major punitive trade measures. Headline, Raka to be part of federal Syria, U.S.-backed militia says. Raka will be part of a decentralized federal Syria now that the city has been freed from Islamic State, the U.S.-backed militias that captured it said on Friday, tying its political future to Kurdish-led autonomy plans for northern Syria. The Kurdish-dominated Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, said the people of the majority Arab city and surrounding province would decide their own future, quote, within the framework of a decentralized, federal, democratic Syria, end quote. In a declaration formally announcing Raka's liberation from Islamic State after 4 months of battles, the SDF pledged, quote, to protect the frontiers of the province against all external threats, end quote, and to hand control to a civil council from the city. The U.S.-backed SDF, which is led by Kurdish militia fighters and also includes Arabs, captured the Syrian de facto capital of Islamic State's self-proclaimed caliphate this week in a decisive defeat for the group that had ruled over millions of people from central Syria to northern Iraq. In Syria, the fight against Islamic State has taken place amid a wider, multi-sided civil war between the government of President Bashar al-Assad, who was backed by Iran and Russia, and multiple rebel groups supported by other powers. With Islamic State's self-declared caliphate crumbling in its last remaining Syrian strongholds, Assad's Russian allies said on Thursday the fight with the jihadist group would soon be over. Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed hope a new peace conference could be convened, though the Kremlin said on Friday it was too early to discuss the timing or venue of the proposed, quote, Congress of the People of Syria, end quote. Headline, the dollar strengthens and stocks rise on U.S. tax plan hopes. World stocks advanced, bond yields rose, and the U.S. dollar strengthened on Friday on increased hopes President Donald Trump could make progress on his fiscal plans after the U.S. Senate approved the budget blueprint that paves the way for tax cuts. Equities rose on Wall Street, with financials, which are expected to benefit from the administration's proposed policies, up over 1% as the best performer of the 11 major S&P sectors. Housing stocks also moved higher after data from the National Association of Realtors showed U.S. home resales unexpectedly increased in September. For the week, the Dow climbed 2%, the S&P gained 0.9%, and the Nasdaq gained 0.4%. The dollar index rose 0.5%, its biggest daily gain in a month. The Senate budget resolution also sent U.S. Treasury yields higher, with 2-year yields reaching a 9-year high as investors reduced bond holdings on worries about more inflation and federal borrowing. Folks, those are the stories that matter this day, October 21st, 2017. Do not have a great day. Go out there and make it a great day. Thanks for being here.